Almost ready.
Surprise us that his new book.
What?
And your new book is debuting tomorrow, right?
Oh, no. Not quite. Okay.
Are they real candles?
No.
Okay, about to begin here. Hello, everyone in the different. Okay. Hello. And here we go. Gefen, I'm gonna read some psukim first. We'll start with some psukim from Tehillim 80. Gefen mi Mitzrayim tasia, tigaresh goyim v'sita eha. Anyone recognize this? Very interesting. Tehillim 80. It's worth looking at for a minute, where it's describing the Jewish people coming out of Egypt as a vine that Hashem took out of Egypt. He grafted a vine, like he took a vine out of Mitzrayim, drove out the nations, and implanted it in the land of Israel. Pinisa lefaneha. You cleared it out in front of it. Vatashresh sharasheha, so that its roots could really take root. Vatimale eretz, and it filled the entire land. The anafeha arzeel, and its branches were arzeel. They were cedars of God. Very powerful. Yeah, feel free to move around furniture.
Sorry, the ribbon.
She is not here. No. Yes, let's see. These are available. Welcome. Oh, perfect. Okay. Tishalach kitzira ad yam ve'el nahar yon kosel. From the river to the sea, says the pasuk. Tehillim 80:12. It stretched its fruit, the Gefen that was planted in Mitzrayim. Its branches went, they say, from the sea to the river. So the roots were all the way to the river were its roots. They have it backwards, which is shocking because you would think that everything they say is right. Lama paratza gedei. Then David Melech turns to Hashem and says, "Why have you broken down its fences?" The aruha kol ovrei derech. So it's a very, the grape is very, very fragile. There's no strong tree. There's no strong branches. It requires a lot of care, and the fence around the vineyard is really critical. If you don't have a fence around the grapes, they're in huge trouble. So why did you do it? And now the arua kol over derech, every person who passes along on the path can just pluck the grapes. Yechar semena chazir miyar. The swine out of the woods nibbles at it. Viziz sadai yirena, and anything that moves in the field feeds upon it. The ayin of Ya'ar, there's a little ayin is raised up in a Tehillim, and the Gemara says in Maseches Kedushin that the ayin of Ya'ar, of Chazir Meyar, is the center letter of the book of Tehillim. Interesting. It's that ayin of Ya'ar. Elokim tzvakot shuvna, God of hosts, return. Habeit mishamayim urei, you know this from MBD, ufkoid gefen zois. V'chano asher noto yeminech. Right, this is the opening song on We Are One, Lulis Arasta. If you don't know it, you don't know Jewish music. It's like not knowing who Babe Ruth is and claiming to be a baseball in the game. You don't know. Okay, it's not your thing. The albein imatz loch, and for the child you have made strong. The ametz is nowadays it's like to adopt. So the foundation which your right hand planted. Chano asher noto yeminech. Where do you know that expression from? The chano asher noto yeminech. It's in the Haggadah. So if you're Lubavitch, you have an out for this because they don't do nirtza. They don't do chasal seder Pesach. They don't have that whole thing. They don't have that whole. They don't do Chad Gadya. They don't do That's part of the thing. We don't say goodbye. Hasidim don't say goodbye. We don't say goodbye to Pesach either. We don't say goodbye to Seder. They have this. They don't do Echad Miyadeh. They don't do Chag Gadya.
It's over.
After Hala.
Nitz.
What's Nitzah? What do they do for Nitzah?
No, they don't do.
Maybe they say Lashana B'Yushalayim, maybe. I think that's it. I think there's no... okay. So you have an excuse to not know this. Otherwise, Chasal... This is in Chasal Seder Pesach. This pasuk is in there. Chasal Seder Pesach Hilchasa. Kechol Mishpata V'Chukasa. Kasher Zachinu L'Saderosa. Kein Nizkal L'Sosa. Zach. Pure one. Shochen Me'ono, who lives in the abode on high. Right? Koimim Kahaladas Neimana. Stand up, the nation that no one can count. The Adas Mimana, that no one can count. Bekarov, soon. Nahel, gather together. Nite Chana. That's from this pasuk. Kana asher nati minech. There is nowhere else. Those who, the branch that you planted, Peduyim, Letzion, Marina, redeemed to Tzion with the song. Shana Haba, right? That's how the Seder goes. So we end the Seder talking about us as this Tehillim 80, and we start with Gefen. Now it's also brought a few times like this. That the Svarim say that we say in the bracha Al Geula Seinu. Geula Seinu is a gimel. The Al Pedus Nafshenu, and the Pedus of Nafshenu, of the redemption of our souls. That's the bracha. So that's Gefen. So they say this Rosh Hashanah Gefen is very important. You have to know this is about wine. The Seder, we make a big deal about wine. There are 4 languages of redemption, and some of the 4 languages of redemption are associated with 4 cups of wine. Why? What does one have to do with the other? Wine is a nice thing that we use generally to celebrate occasions, but what are the 4 languages? So we know there's Vehotzesi, Vehitzalti, V'ga'alti, V'lakachti. There are 4 languages in the Torah of Hashem's saving the Jewish people. V'hotzesi, I'll take them out. V'hitzalti, I'll save them. V'ga'alti, I'll redeem them. V'lakachti. And the Gemara says that the 4 cups that we have at the Seder correspond to the 4 Lashonos of Geula that are there in the Torah. So that's an interesting thing, that redemption is we specifically need wine for such a thing. Gefen. Also, it says in the Psukim that the plagues in Egypt, the Avar Hashem lingof es Mitzrayim. And over again, the plagues, the Magefosai, are called a negef. Nun gimel fe. And when you twist that word around of negef, the Shem Yishmuel says this, that it turns into Gefen. So the Shem Yishmuel says, the Gefen, Gimel, Pei Nun, is a flipping around of negef. In Mitzrayim, it says the blood will be a sign on the houses. V'lo yeh bachem negef, and there won't be a negef that's destructive. And so through the blood that we put on the thing to separate the Jewish homes from the Gentile homes, we separate ourselves from the Egyptians. Okay, so it says Hashem Yishmuel that similarly the Gefen, and we'll see what this is. Gefen mi Mitzrayim Tasiya. Hashem saved us by pulling us out of Mitzrayim. Had something to do with the plagues and separating us from the Goyim. So I want to read to you from the Tcheles Mordechai of Brujan. This is Rav Shalom Shwadron, the Das Torah, the Marsham. So he says the following: when the angel of Hashem is impeding the progress of Bilam. Bilam is out to destroy the Jewish people through cursing them somehow. And we talked a little last week about how Bilam it's sorcery, and it's this attempt to predict the future, which you can't really mess with the Jewish people because they're under God's control and they have all different system of rules other than nature. But Yesh Leva'er, he says, I once explained the pasuk in Tehillim 80, which says Gefen mi Mitzrayim Tasiya. You took the Jewish people who were a Gefen out of Egypt, based on what it says in the Medrash Rabbah, that there were a list of things that the Jewish people did that because of that they merited to leave Egypt. Do you remember what they were? They didn't change their names. They didn't change their clothing. They didn't speak Lashon Hara. They didn't snitch on each other. Some people say Shmam Lushonam Malbusham. right? Their clothing, their names, their language. So there's different lists in different places. The consistent thing is that they maintained their identity. In fact, that is what it says in the Haggadah. Vayu sham l'goy gadol melamed shahayu Yisrael mitsuyanim sham. The Jewish people stood out. Mitsuyan, which in modern Hebrew means excellent, actually is litzayin. It's to stand out, outstanding, right? It's like, so that's really what the word would exactly mean. And it means that, says the Ritva, that they dress differently and they talk differently, and the Jews are walking around as a minority, being different. And for that, they made it out. They didn't make it out. It doesn't say because of Shabbos and kosher. And they made it out because they were still, talking about schlepping to get a bagel, right? And you still have this today, these Jews that will bagel you in the store, that they wanted to be known in certain contexts. So if they would do it all the time, if they'd walk around every day being very Jewish, I mean, it's a real merit. It's a value. Yeah, what do you say?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's the merit they left early because Hashem did make a promise they would still come out of.
No, they would not have made it out at all. In other words, the Jewish people, we see it, they could have lost everything. If they wouldn't have gotten out, then the Arizal seems to say, right, in many sources, that they were reaching the 49th level of Tumah. And so it's a good question of what would you do with the promise of Abraham? That's a good question. Maybe some of Shevet Levi, maybe a handful of people would make it. But I mean, the Jewish people that made it out with a merit. And this is the merit of being distinct and different was very, very significant. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so Hashem has made. So he says that's why. I'll read you something from Hirsch, which helps about this also, which is a lot like what you said. So again, the Gefen also says the Marsham. It says something very original because there's a Mishnah that says something like this about the olive, and he extends it. He says there's a Tikkune Zohar, says the Marsham, that a grape cannot be grafted with, and it's not mekabel harkava. You cannot graft a grape vine with anything else very effectively. So it's incredibly resistant to being grafted. I don't know what it means when we get like a grape tomato, but I don't think it's a grape and a tomato. I don't know. I think it's just a small tomato. Right? They have those. There's cherry ones, and there's also grape, but there's like different shapes. That'd be cool. Yeah, it's grafted with cotton candy. That's a good point. There you saw the Kabbalah Satorah. So he says this is the idea that when Bilam was being told, essentially, you're not going to be able to get these people because there's a goder mizeh vegoder mizeh. They have these boundaries on either side of them. A goder mizeh, really, it was like a skinny path. So he got his leg smashed against one of the sides. But he says what it really means is that the Jewish people are very defined. We have our Kedarim. We dress different. We talk different. We listen to different music. We talk different language. We behave. So we're not really, you were not going to be able to destroy a nation like that. He quotes the Haggadah, Melamed Shahayu Mitsuyanim. The Jewish people stood out of Mitzrayim, and therefore they weren't able to be fully assimilated into Mitzrayim. And he says, okay, he goes on a little bit about different ways of mixing it. But that's one very strong thing. Rav Hirsch says something that Rav Iris said over here. He said, it's an allegorical account of the manner in which Hashem has set us up as his own plant in the middle of the human race. The use of Gefen is an allegory for the Jewish people. You also see that in Yechezkel 15, that the Jewish people are compared to a Gefen. He explains that the vine can be the noblest among all plants if it brings forth the fruit expected of it. But without its fruit, it's totally worthless. What are you going to do with a vine, right? It's really not you can build a home out of it like you can with other trees or other. For its wood alone has almost no use whatsoever. So too, Yisrael is the noblest and most blessed among nations, provided it fulfills its purpose. If Yisrael should become unfaithful to its calling, it sinks far below all the other nations and will be really of no use or value whatsoever. Furthermore, the fruit of that vine is the most crushed and abused among fruits. He quotes Chazal. Our sages tell us that it's the most, in order to get good wine, but this very abuse serves to ennoble it, and finally he who has pressed it and abused it is overpowered by its strength. So, in other words, the wine itself, grapes go through a lot of trouble in order to become fine wine. So that is a beautiful story also about the history of the Jewish people. that we see ourselves as very fragile and requiring gedarim around. And the minute they're open, we're susceptible to anyone. But ultimately, we become very great from that experience. Okay, one more thing. Okay, so let's start with this. Um, there's one more source to read together here from the Bal HaKelim, Reb Shmuel Laniado. It's a few hundred years ago. It's a very important name. So he has a sefer on Tehillim called Teruas Melech. Listen to what he says. It's also very nice and very insightful. And then hopefully we'll be able to figure out something about the Seder, about Pesach, about from all this material. Gefen mi Mitzrayim Tasiyah. So says Reb Shmuel Laniado. Mismatze ba'adam shnei hefechim b'nose echad. Hachomer v'hatzur. In a human being, you find mind and body somehow together, soul and physical together, and they're trying to get along with each other. And the problem is they're always fighting. He uses language like with Yaakov and Esav in the womb. I mean, they're constantly in a battle with each other because one of them sees physical comforts and taiva hileinayim, right? That's the body is always kind of seeking kol machmadei tevel and runs after all these things. And then the soul is always looking for insight and doing the will of God and idealism and all the good things that we want to do in life. And he says, basically, our sages would say that angels only have one heart. They only have one heart. Like it says, Avram said to the angels, he said, V'sa'adu libchem. But for us, it's levavchem. So libchem is one heart. And levavchem has two vases to tell you, right, that a person has two hearts. In other words, you have two jockeying imperatives inside of you at all times. There's the neshama and the guf. Okay, this is old news. And he says, human beings who are this interesting mixture have to now serve Hashem, like it says about Avram, umatzasa es levavo ne'eman lefanecha. That Avram managed to pull his physical side into sync with his spiritual side. In fact, the gematria of the name Avraham is 248. The word in Aramaic for wine is chamar. And chamar is 248 because unlike almost any other drink, when a person drinks wine, it totally impacts all of their behavior. Their whole body can suddenly start, you don't drive as well. Everything works differently when you drink a little bit of wine. You can jump up suddenly. Why is that gentleman standing on a table with a lampshade on his head, singing Frank Sinatra songs? Well, he had too much wine. That's always the answer. He had too much orange juice. So chamar is the 240. There are 248 limbs in a person's body. The word chamor, whenever you see a donkey in Jewish, anywhere, in Jewish writing or something, from Tanakh all the way down, it always represents pure, strong physicality. So all the Mefarshim say when it says Avram saddled his chamor, it means he totally conquered this 248 limbs of his body so that only he was in control and not his body. Whereas Bilam, it says that he had a female donkey, an ason, and our sages tell us that he was having a physical relationship with his donkey, which is a metaphor for him being totally engaged in every physical thing in this world. I mean, it might also be literal with him. We don't have to save him from any embarrassing things, right? But that's what it was. It wasn't just that he did that one sin. It was that he was married to it. It was that was what he was connected to. Okay, in fact, the Gemara in the Dharm says Avram wasn't always called Avraham. He was first called Avram. And that was until his Bris Milah period when he made this relationship with Hashem. And his name became Avraham. Now, why? So the Gemara explains. It says because originally he developed control over 243 limbs of his body. But there were 5 more limbs that he couldn't control. And when he got the Bris Milah, Hashem gave him control over those. Like he achieved that. And those are your 2 eyes and your 2 ears and a person's private, organ. So he says, why? Because his eyes, you can't control what you see. You walk down the street, someone could walk around walk around the corner and you see something that you weren't supposed to look at. And your ears, you can't fully control what you hear. And bris milah, I mean, it's a part of a person's body. How are you supposed to completely control that urge? And the answer is, with enough work, a person can put their neshama in charge. That's the message of Avram Avinu. That's the message of bris milah. And then he became Avraham and had control over all 248. Tamar, all of them. In which case, it's fascinating because it says in the Torah that Avram is sitting at the entrance of his tent and he lifted up his eyes and he saw. Well, yeah, like whatever. He saw. I need to know that he lifted up his eyes. And the answer is because until then, that wouldn't have made so much sense. But now that he was just, the Talmud tells us, he was just given control over all 200, including his eyes. It's like he doesn't see anything. He doesn't lift his eyes up to see. He just doesn't see it. Avram Avinu now experiences what his soul wants him to experience. He got this incredible gift from Hashem. You do everything you can. Hashem will give you. These things are not going to come your way. Things that you're not supposed to see, you won't see because you did everything that you can to learn to control yourself. Okay, that's a big job. And that's represented by Avraham. And that's what it means that Hashem found livavo ne'eman before him. That uniquely about Avram, we say it every day in davening, that Hashem found Avram's levav, his two hearts together were working in sync. Especially, he says, when he threw himself into the Kivshana Eish. So that is a story that represents totally subduing his physical desires to be able to orient them only for Kedusha. Quote some things from David HaMelech about this, and then he says like this. He says, you have shalom. A person has internal peace in one of two ways. He says, when a person's chomer, their physical side, right, their 248, are subjected to their brain, to their mind. And they really live that way. They do things, they're disciplined. He says, one of the great gifts, beyichud be'uma Yisraelis, hayosa chalusha sachomer. He says you'll find that the Jewish people are physically just not all that impressive. We're not the strongest ones physically. It's very interesting. I always find that like every so often they're talking about this Jewish player who's about to make the Major League Baseball or something, and it's like, oh yeah, and by the way, his father is a convert or something, or the basketball one. There's always like some, for the guy to really go far, there's got to be a little, which is, by the way, it's like a beautiful thing. Bring in those kochos to Klal Yisrael and use them for kedusha. Like we don't, we love the game, and holy ger is truly holy. But in other words, it's such a I always get such a kick out of it. Like I'm always right away looking to see where it was, because physically we're just not, we're not the same. And that's not what we excelled in throughout all the years in history. Additionally, so he says already from the time we were in Egypt, the back-breaking labor was there in order that our physical side be weakened, so that we'd be more spiritually inclined. That's what we would excel in, and not in the physical things. Torah mateshes kocho shaladam, our sages tell us. Torah itself has the thing that it weakens a person's physical body, because you just can't be that enthusiastic about it. I mean, from the moment that a person really cares about spiritual accomplishments and intellectual things, and so they just cannot find the hours necessary to be that kind of a bodybuilder, to be that kind of, and certainly generationally for our whole nation to become, these Amazonian powerful people. It's just not realistic because we're too busy with Torah. May Oz Haisel Goy Beretz Mitzrayim Kur HaBarzel. He said, the backbreaking labor was there for this purpose, and it was to weaken them so that their minds would grow stronger, because there's a battle between the mind and the body always, and anything that weakens the body strengthens the mind, and vice versa. It's interesting. Hashem wanted the Jewish people to be like the flimsy grapevine. I mean, you can't even make a spike out of the grapevine. I think that's what that word is. Yated. You can't even use it to dig yourself a little hole in the ground. It's such a flimsy vine. But the fruit is the absolute sweetest. Misamech Elokim va'anashim, brings joy to gods and men, or angels and men, or powerful ones and men. Gefen mitzrayim tasiyah. That the story of Egypt and pulling us out of Egypt was in order to turn us into a Gefen. That was the goal. Ve'al yedei matan Torah. So then he says, and eventually we got everything we needed, the tam varech, all the ingredients in this sapling vine to make the most delicious wine throughout history, all came from Gefen mi Mitzrayim Tasiyah. So it was God's plan that the Jewish people not win um, at being the strongest and being the most focused on their physical, but instead to be most focused on the Gefen. Now, okay, still, we need a little more background. The Maharal is extremely helpful. And he says the following. In chapter 23 of, let's see, I hope I have it here open. Okay, so he's talking in chapter 23 of the Sefer Gevuras Hashem. The Maharal writes a whole bunch of interesting things about Mitzrayim and about this. And then he has a letter directly about wine and goyim and mixing together, and hopefully we come up with something. Rabbi Yochanan says in the Medrash Rabbah Shmos Rabbah Bezhei, the reason that Hashem revealed himself in a sneh, in a thorn bush to Moshe Rabbeinu, is to teach Shemora Yoser Milas Yisrael, is to show the great level of the Jewish people, so that you should know they are the tachlis v'shleimus ha'olam, that the Jewish people are the purpose and completeness of the world. Nivdolim mikol hametzius, unosnim la'olam hashafal hazeh geder v'hashlama. Because the Jewish people give this world its protective fence and its completeness. So the Jews are the fence for the world. Kemo hageder shehu hashlama el hagina. If you have a garden but you don't have a fence around it, it becomes trampled quickly. So too, lakach nigla kadosh baruch hu b'sneh. Why? Because what is the purpose of a thorn bush? Its only productive purpose is protective. It's lios geder el davar. The thorns are very, very protective, like a shoshana bein achochim, right? It stops the animal from reaching in and taking this beautiful thing. So that's the purpose of the thorns. A muvdal min hagina. It's separate from the garden. It's its own thing. It's there on its own in order to protect everything else of value in the world. So he says that's the Jewish people. They're nivdalim mametzias, v'nosnim geder v'hashlama la'olam. The Jewish people give form and shape and protection to the world. And that's why Hashem revealed himself in such a thing. Okay. And he says like this. Why does the sneh, why does it have kotzim ve'ose v'rodin? So just like a sneh has thorns, but also produces, so this thorn bush we're talking about is a rose bush. And it also produces vradin, vereds, roses. So kach Yisrael, so too the Jewish people. Yesh b'hem tzadikim v'yesh b'hem rishon. So tzadikim are the beautiful roses, and the thorns are the ones who make it, into the news. Somehow there's a protection there, right? It's interesting. Yeah. So the Maharal is going to try to make some sense out of this, but he's bringing two opinions in the Medrash, and he says this is the second one. He says it means Yesh Dimion Gadol ben Yisrael Lisneh. There's another comparison between the Jewish people and the thorn bush. Hashneh Yesh Bo Kotz. The sneh has a thorn. The Yesh Bo Vered, and has a rose. Ki Hasneh Nota L'Shnei Darim Mischalfim. Because every Jewish person is like this sneh, who has the netia, the orientation towards two completely opposite things. Ki Yesh B'Yisrael Tzadikim v'Rishon. He says Rishon. If the Jewish people have wicked people, Hem Rishon Ma'od. Jews don't do things halfway. If they're going to be a Russia, they're going to be a super Russia. The Yeshbam Tzadikim Gedolim Ma'od. And if they're going to have tzaddikim, they're going to have magnificently great tzaddikim. V'zeki hakoshi shabi Yisrael, because the Jewish people are so tough. Kasher hunota latov, when it's used for good things, it's unstoppable. There's tzaddikim gedolim ma'od. Einam sorry min mitzvos. You just can't get the Jews to stop from keeping the mitzvos. Miskashkim umischazkim b'mitzvos. V'chein kasher hu misapech l'ra. If the Jewish person flips over to the dark side, so yesh b'hem koshi. I mean, they were really tough. Shehem mima'anim lishmoa. They don't listen, and they're very stubborn. Him she'oref. Okay, so this is why we're similar to a sneh also, because the Jewish people are here to be a border thing. They're supposed to be a hedge around everything else. And that comes along with thorns. But the difficulty, a person, you're going to find, even in the finest person, that there will be negative midos that can grow because asher dakam lagadol al davar kasha kamosne, because that's how a Jewish person is supposed to be. Only we're supposed to use it right. Yisrael kshe arpam gorim letov, kish she'omdim be'emunasam. The Jewish people stick with it for a few thousand years. You keep killing them and keep doing everything horrible to them. Hopefully that's over, but right now it doesn't feel that way, right? The Jewish people are real victims, unfortunately, all throughout the history, and they stand by their emunah no matter what. But also the wicked ones are also very difficult. So that's a characteristic of the Jewish people that are like this. Okay, he also says something interesting. He brings another thing. The Medrash says that the sneh is interesting because when you stick your hand in, it's not so bad. What's really hard is to get your hand out without getting torn apart. So perhaps it's the shape of the thorns, but I know there's sometimes with these palm trees that they have very sharp, and to try to get your hand out, that was interesting. It sounded like fireworks, but the car back from. Okay. Then yado mistaretes. That's when your hand gets torn up. So when the Jewish people go down into a country, right, go out to Mitzrayim, so nobody necessarily noticed much at the time. But when it was time for them to leave, right, and it says so to the sneh, a bird, reaches in to try to get something, doesn't realize the trouble it's gotten itself into. When it tries to get itself out, that's when it's real trouble. So he says like this. When the Jewish people tried to be mischaber el ha'umos, when Jewish people tried to attach to the nations, he says in the beginning, it's always pleasant. It's always pleasant because the nations are like the klipa for the fruit. They're like sort of an outer shell that can even be protective. And they feed off each other. But eventually, the fruit needs to separate off. It needs to separate off into its own. So originally, the Jewish people continue to keep having these relationships with the going wherever they go. And in the end, getting out is very unpleasant because they shouldn't have gotten so close. Okay, so let's see a little more. He has a few more things that he says here. He gets into the number 4 and the number 5 and redemption. I think we'll jump over some of this. It's all very interesting. But chapter 23 of Gevuras Hashem. If you want to see a little more about all this, the letter hey, the letter pay, the difference. Okay, the sneh, 120. Okay. In a nutshell, what we're trying to bring from this piece of Maharal is how the Jewish people are expected, really. They're really expected to stay separate in a protective role over the human race. In other words, we're supposed to be a light to the nations. We're supposed to make sure that the world doesn't disappear and that the true teachings come. And if you look at Isaiah 53, you'll see that the Jewish people are this suffering servant who go throughout all of history with a very important message to the human race. And they're always beaten for it and attacked for it. They took that prophecy and then they made up stories about a false Messiah named Jesus and said that, well, look, it fits perfectly. I drew the bullseye right around the target after I shot the arrow, and it's like unbelievable. He was pierced, and he was, well, you wrote it later, so it was a prophecy from before. No, but you made up the story. So the whole thing is a little funny, but if you look at it carefully, you'll see what a powerful story it is. That the Jewish people really are the ones who have gone through this throughout history, and the Seder night is the beginning of understanding that exile is embracing our role as the wine, as the Gefen, as the one who went through all kinds of troubles in this beautiful history that we have. And we're proud of it. And we say, Vehisha Amdalav Hossein V'lanu. There's one way to read that is there's one thing that has stood as a consistent thing for our parents and us. What's that one thing you can definitely count on? that it's not just once in a while they try to destroy us. In every generation, they try to completely wipe out the Jewish people, and Hashem saves us. So that's an important thing to get into. When a person wants to convert to the Jewish people, Gemara in Yevamos says that we turn to the person and we say, I ata yodea. We ask the person, the first thing we say, do you not know, She Yisrael Bismanas, that the Jewish people nowadays was 2,000 years ago, right? It's as relevant as, She Yisrael Bismanas at Divuyim, Sechufim, Meturafim. They're embittered and they're scabbed and they're torn apart. V'yisurin bo'an aleim. And horrible suffering comes upon them. And in the language, I think in the language, it's not in the Gemara, it's not in the Rambam, but I believe in this Maseches Gerim, which is one of the Maseches Ketanas, it's a brisa. I think it says V'kovrim es b'neim. They often have to bury their children. It's a horrible thing. The things that the Jewish people have been through with the Goyim, and they tell this person, why would you want Mara Isa Shebasa lehiskaya? Like, what could have possibly possessed you to want to convert? Don't you know that Yisrael B'zmanazeh are suffering in this way, that way? We use this like string of adjectives, and if the person says, I know, ve'eni kedai, and I don't deserve the privilege of suffering along with them, then we accept that person immediately, and they're a candidate for conversion now. And by the end of that day, they should be done. We teach them a few of the mitzvahs and this and that. And if they need a bris milah, then we'll have to wait a few days after that to be first do a bris, and then they come back for. But if it's a woman, it can be done very quickly as long as they have that orientation of it's a privilege to suffer to be a Jew, and that's certainly if we're already Jews anyway. So then we have to know that what some very holy people have said, maybe in jest, to try to deal with challenges in their lives. They would say, well, the chosen people were chosen for suffering, so they're not wrong. They're actually absolutely right. Absolutely right. That from the time of Mitzrayim, the Jewish people would have a certain level of suffering. The only thing is that it's only physical. Spiritually, they have the greatest possible level of joy that's accessible to any human being. Because the spiritual side is much stronger and much more powerful and much more stubborn. And there is no joy in the world that can compare to this. We are the Nitei Chana. So at the end of the Seder, when we finish the whole experience of passing along this message of there's Negef, there's suffering, and then there's Gefen, there's becoming the most refined vine that a person can be, the most refined grape that then wine is produced from. And it's physically, we're very weak. We need Hashem to be our boundary. But so then a person who has that orientation has something magnificent to pass along to their children. V'hisha amda is not something that should really upset people. Baruch Hashem saves us. But I don't understand. He's the one causing this too. He's the same guy that put us in Egypt. So what are we so excited about this? Why would anybody want to be part of this nation? And the answer is when you understand what we really stand for, and why our spiritual nature is incompatible with a physical orientation that is so focused on material and gashmis, that kind of a piece. So then we're in the right religion. A person should feel very, very strong about it. They should listen to the 10 Makos and understand that ultimately Hashem does come. Ultimately, we come out on top. And there was a lot of years in between. There were people that died in between. There was a lot of blood spilled. You understand? And yet it's a very happy story. So Bekarov Nahel Nitei Kana. It's interesting that at the end of the Seder we kind of sum up this attitude of we're drinking these 4 cups of wine. We're remembering, how wine comes about. Let's not forget that's the process of Geula. There's a lot of crushing and there's a lot of suffering. To a certain extent. Okay, but then there was this story in the times of the Maharal. He says this. He writes a letter published in the back of the Gevuras Hashem, because I saw Ksas B'nei Adam Partze Gidran Shal Chachamim. I've seen a number of people now. There's a group. It was a group of people in his time who were breaking the rabbi's geder. The rabbis had made a geder, a fence, the Torah. Not only are they violating an Avera, they've gone much more serious because there was something called Stam Yenam. Stam Yenam is to drink Goyish wine. If a Gentile makes wine, you're not allowed to drink the wine. Why not? So the truth is that if they worshipped idols with the wine, that would be called Yayin Nesach. And that would be a problem. But what's wrong with Stam Yenam? It's just a bottle of wine that you buy. And so these people are starting to use this. They're saying, come on. This is ridiculous. It's just wine. We should be allowed to drink it. Not only that, they want to use it for the 4 kosos on Pesach because it's the finest wine they can get. It's expensive wine. So they want to drink it on Pesach. And the last one, the last thing that they've done that's even worse is they've started to they're not just doing the Aver, they're trying to explain why it's okay. And he starts to explain like this. 4 cups of wine, what are we doing? So first of all, the purpose of drinking, Iker Isser Yayin Nesach, the purpose of it is to separate the Jews from the Goyim. That's what Gemara says. The destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, they got together and they made decrees about the oil so that you shouldn't come to drink their wine, so you shouldn't intermarry. If you can't drink with people, it keeps you very separate from them. It makes the parties difficult. It makes going to the bars difficult, and it keeps you away from intermarriage. And this person says, I know better. So like we always say, you don't know better. I remember once, Chazal know better than us. They just knew better. I remember once somebody asked me to come to their house to help with a mezuzah or something. So that happens. Can you come check out the mezuzahs and make sure you put them on the right place? And I come in and they're showing me the bedroom or something, and there's one bed. So that's none of my business. I mean, it could be that they have another one under it. It could be that they have a mattress. It could be that they bring it out every 6 months. I don't know what the story, right? I don't know it's none of my business. I wasn't paying attention. And the person starts to explain to me because they feel bad. Actually, we really, really should get another one, but we've been living here a year and a half. We just never got around to it. But don't worry. We sleep on separate sides at certain times that we're not allowed to be in the bed together. So we do. So I didn't say anything to them. I remember thinking in my head, I'm not sure who I should trust, you or the rabbis of the Gemara. I don't know. They told me that this doesn't work and that it's going to lead to other things. But here you are telling me the other way, and I'm really torn here. So you can't say all these things out loud. But you could wait, and 15 years later or something, you could say it in a shir. And hope they're not listening. Or that if they are, they've done so much tshuva that they think it's funny else. But it's very important. In other words, they really knew with the laws of yichud, with all the things that they said, they knew exactly what was right and what human nature is. And so these people can be in trouble. I mean, if it says it leads to, but he says it's very important. Oh, and he says, since the purpose is to keep us apart, he says, Hashem took us out of Egypt. If you look at the words of the pasuk and what we're trying to celebrate Seder night, about how distinguished we are from the nations, and Hashem shows us that we shouldn't intermarry with them. He didn't want us in Egypt around them anymore, right? I want you to be for me a nation. You're my slaves. You don't belong with these other people. It's very explicit. It's very clear. He says, it's so backwards. The person drinking the wine is mevatel the hevdel between the Jews and the Goyim. Then he explains like this. There's 2 kinds of differences. These people would say, listen, come on. He says, I'm already married. And Yomer, he says, I'm not going to marry anyone else. I already have a wife. So what's the problem with me drinking the wine? Right? He says, it's a shema, ba'ulai, ve'efsher. He says, these are idiotic. Because if you're a philosopher, you know that. So first, halachically, he says it's wrong. Yeah, he says because you can't just undo a gzeira. It doesn't seem to apply to you, right? That's not how it works. But he says more than that. He says a hevdel, to be a distinction between 2 people that actually makes you different. It has to be, the hevdel has to be mukhrach mibli shum efsharus al chibur. If I could really have been, right, a nail technician, right? And the nail tech really could have been a rabbi. It just happens to be I picked this and he or she picked that, right? So we're not really so different. But if my qualities are this, right? You have 2 people, one can only be a doctor, one can only be a lawyer, so then that's a difference. It's not a difference of any meaning if at any moment it could switch. Then it's just circumstance. And being in a different circumstance than another person doesn't make you essentially different. A person who doesn't do the things that would connect you to intermarriage, the minute that you start doing something where you're doing an act that if that were to follow the normal course of things, you're now much closer to intermarrying. You've already broken down the distinction. You understand? And so the Maharal says these people drinking this, whether they're going to actually go and intermarry or not, they've already made themselves closer than they should be to that, which makes them less distinct. They're now just we're identical. We could get married. Yeah, I married her and you married her, but like we could have switched and it wouldn't really be different because we're drinking together, and so we're all the same and we have all the same values and we have all the okay. That's the first thing he says. Then he starts getting into all the deep things about wine. When the Jewish people were in their land before the Beis Mikdash was destroyed, they had their own culture, they had their own country. It was just totally not reasonable that we would be connected to the Goyim in the way that we would be during exile. And that's why they got together and made sure at that moment it became necessary to make such a decree. It really was not reasonable before that. Even if there would be a Goy passing through the land of Israel on the way to make a pilgrimage to the Beis HaMikdash or something, it wouldn't be the same problem. But now that we all live among each other, and that's why the decree had to come specifically then, right before Galus. And he says like this. The entire concept of drinking wine is that it blurs distinctions. Like we see on Purim, you drink wine, so you cannot distinguish between Haman and Mordechai. He says, it says, Yayin v'shecher al tesht ulahavdil ulahoros. A person who drank a revius of wine is not allowed to make an important halachic ruling, because you can't really trust your mind the same anymore when you've had alcohol. Alcohol, he says, also the Gemara says, brings peace between people. It's makareves esabrios, two people that hate each other and they drink a little bit together. Come on, they hug each other, they work it out, because people don't feel their opinions as fiercely, and our opinions is really what separates us from other people also. So there's an efsharas hachibur. When people drink together, they become very connected in a way that they don't see. So that's one of the properties of yayin. Additionally, he says something very interesting, which I don't know exactly what it means, because maybe I don't know enough about grapes. He says wine comes from the very, very pneumius, the very inside. He says the thing that makes a Jew and a Goy different is not our body. Our bodies are similar, right? I mean, maybe one's a little stronger, one's a little weaker, but it's going to be the same. You can't say there's people who say, no, the Jews are different. So if we smoke pack after pack of cigarettes, it won't have any impact because all the research has been done on Goyim. You ever heard this one? You ever heard that one? Yeah, I remember that's all yeshiva thing. It's a brilliant, svara to say for a nudnik, but it's very silly. I mean, scientifically, there really isn't a way to look at a person, right, and know from anything other than his actual DNA markers that say Ashkenazi Jew or something. You really wouldn't know. So, even though there are, you could kind of sometimes you're in a room and you could tell the person's Jewish from across the room. But Jews can do that. Also, black people are good at doing that. They can know if the other person. So I once heard a comedian say that. Chazal really say that because they say, it's very funny. Chazal say that the Jewish people are compared to the black person in a room full of white people. That just like that person stands out, makushi mishuna ba'oro, they have a unique color skin that all those other people don't have. So to the Jewish people, stand out completely, right, from the people that they're around. Like, so there is a quality, but those qualities that we're saying that make us like a pariah, stand out, different, is not going to be physical. They're going to be deep, deep pneumius qualities, and that's wine. So what does it say? Madrega pnimis nesteris. What makes the wine is the most inside part of the grape, and he says that's really what the quality is. Yayin is bigamatria shivim, 70. Yod, Yod, and Nun is 10, 10, and 50. And that's sod. That's a secret. And he says it's not a mysterious thing because, first of all, when a person drinks wine, they let out all their secrets. I mean, if you just want to loosen someone's lips a little bit, give them a little alcohol, and they spill what they want to say. And then he says that
why 70 is secret?
Samech Vav Daled. Sod is 66 and 4. 60 and 6 and 4. So sod equals 70 and yayin equals 70. So Gemara says what you have to do is you get wine in and then sod starts coming out. So that's the Gemara. So the Maharal says that the secrets, the deep things, are the pnimi things. They're the things that are supposed to really stay with us. We're not supposed to just spread, right? A person's personal, private world is supposed to remain that way. Otherwise, what's special about the Jewish? I mean, if we're just open, we have no gather, we have no, right, nothing surrounding the grape. Okay, then he says, the Jewish people and the nations of the world share all the externalities, he says, but they really are very, very different on the inside. Um, and you find that we have like a different, he says there were 70 nations. The nations of the world began to be 70 nations, 70 at once at the Tower of Babel. The Jewish people, as soon as they got down to Egypt, they became a nation. But outside, they were only 69 people. And then Yocheved is born on the way in, the walls, because they cannot be in Egypt without 70. They have to be a nation. And a nation is the number 70, right? That share some sort of internal, deep identity that separates them from everything else. But they cannot be outside of the land of Israel with that because that's not time yet. So he says that's why she's born on the way in, so that there's never a moment that they were in Egypt where they weren't 70, and there's never a moment outside Egypt when they were 70, because they have to start in Egypt. But that's why they're both 70, because that's the number of starting a nation, just like starting all the nations was 70 at once. And he goes on quite a bit about this number, that what we're celebrating at the Seder is the beginning of the Jewish nation, which started through the process in Mitzrayim, and we're remembering that whole process, remembering how eventually the Jewish people came out, and that's Geula Senu Upedus Nafshenu. That's the Gefen of Geula, of redemption, and Pedus Nafshenu is redeeming our souls. In other words, physically, wherever we are, can be unpleasant and can be difficult. But if we have internally this deep awareness of that we're not really here for that physical stuff, and we're here to be the grapes that Hashem protects properly, around our vineyard. And whatever crushing happens, and whatever challenges happen, and whatever suffering happens, is specifically meant, he says, in a large part, to keep us separate. That's one of the primary purposes, is to keep us faithful, to keep us loyal, to keep us separate. So when the Jewish people manage to do that and be like the grape, which the Marsham said is the one that you can't graft with anything else. Just be yourself. Just be pedus nafshenu. Just your soul should be authentic to itself. So that is what we're trying to pass along, really. I mean, that's what the religion is. The religion is, what we're doing on the Seder night, is to pass along the message that we used to be slaves to all kinds of other things, and to Mitzrayim. And now we're only slaves to Hashem, which means that no one else gets to impact us or influence us or make a difference. We decide how we want to dress. We decide who we want to be. And if we stand out badly, and he says that these people are making such a huge mistake. He said, I could go on with so much more, but the depths and the gematrias and the things about the grapes he says, because they don't understand. So it's a beautiful thing to learn in depth. If a person has time to do the 10 pages or so, whatever it comes out, to really understand how, when our sages said something, it on every level of Torah, it becomes deep and nuanced and sophisticated. I'll just finish with one more thing. It's brought about the concept of the three matzahs, that there are three things that keep us away from being deeply connected to our purpose. We have spiritual purpose. We have something to do in this world. We're supposed to be idealistic. We're supposed to be those helpless grapes who are just being protected by Hashem, but we don't always lean in to our spiritual side as much as we should. And what is it that really gets in the way? So they say, the Psalms say, that Rav Shor brings over here, me'artzecha and mimolartecha and mibe'esavicha. The three things that Avram Avinu, the first one of our people, was told to let go of. People that are living in a certain country have a big influence. The culture of the country that you're in, and the beliefs and the attitudes. And so he was told that you have to be willing to leave behind all the non-kosher attitudes and ideals of your country, um, so that it doesn't have an impact on you. Moladatecha. I mean, that means moladatecha means the way that you were born. The person says, well, I was born with a temper. Well, I was born with anxiety. Well, I was born right. Okay, so you have to learn how to address those things and live a productive life. Um, a person has taivos and they have, et cetera, et cetera. And mi base avicha is the way that a person allowed themselves to be trained. So, in other words, there's one is from the country, it's from the street. The other one is even from the home. A person can come from a home where they didn't have it, they didn't, nobody ever told the kid to brush his teeth. Okay, but you're 20 years old now, and it's time to start brushing your teeth, right? Like you have to get over that. So the same thing is true with the religion as well. I remember this once. This is a mind-boggling thing. I was at a Shabbaton with the high school boys, and there's one boy who Friday night, like we all get together to daven, and he won't take a sitter. So for Kabbalah, when it comes to Maariv, I handed him my sitter. I said, listen, you should totally daven Maariv. Like, I know maybe he doesn't. He says, my family doesn't pray on Friday night. So I said, like, I totally respect that everyone's in a different place. I said, but like, can't be that it's your minhag not to. You're here anyway. Why not? Like, why not do it? He says, no, I'm not opening a sitter. I said, I'll give you $50. He says, no. I said, $100. He says, no. I said, is there any amount of money in the world that you would take to just open a sitter for Maariv on a Friday night? And he says, absolutely not. This is not what we do in my family. I'm not doing it. So he was a little boy. He turned out okay. He's a good kid. Went to yeshiva. In the long run, he's fine. But isn't that something? In other words, it's an emblematic story of how many people will live their entire life. It's like, in my family, I've heard these kind of things. My mother didn't cover her hair. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, what? That's the answer? That's the answer? Like, I'm not saying, well, she was a good person. She was a lovely person. But, right, that kind of perspective. So whatever a person got from their home, there's a lot of good things we get from our families. But you have to be willing to leave behind some of the traumas and some of the errors and some of the imperfections and keep growing. He says, so that's what it is. Those three things. And he said the difference between chametz and matzah is 3. Because they both have a mem tzadi. One is ches and one is hey. So the difference between chametz and matzah is 3. And that's Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. In other words, whether a person can become free of the impact, of the influence, of the externality, and allow their soul to be that Gefen, right? To be that internal, it's the best fruit. It's the most delicious thing. It's the most expensive thing. It's the finest of, it's Masamech Elokim V'Anoshim. But that's, the difference is 3. There's 3 things. Those are the 3 things that we really have to be prepared. And the final application, perhaps, of all of this is the incredible courage that all of the Mefarshim here were talking about, in one way or another, that it takes to even to be a Russia. Even to be a Russia. If a Jew is a Russia, he's a courageous Russia. He's out there. He's screaming for causes that no one else even believes in yet. He's at the forefront, right? The Jews for the justice of Palestine. Saying it takes a certain amount of chutzpah and courage and strength. You see a kid in the Orthodox community. You ever see a kid who's walking around and his parents are frum and they go to shul and he's out there on Shabbos smoking a cigarette and hanging out with the dregs of society. And that's a lot of courage. I'm saying it takes a lot of strength. So it's the wrong way to use the courage. There's a good way to use it. But the Jewish people that succeed are the ones who have that spirit. They have the courage. They're willing to get up in anyone's face. And we need it now more than ever. We're seeing that we're really being tested with this, that the entire world is looking at us, as they always have. But in my lifetime anyway, it has never been this direct, where they're just saying, like, you're all scoundrels. And we're back to the witch hunts. And like, yeah, but we do some really nice things. Well, obviously you do nice things because you have to, in order to, like, there's in New York City, I don't know if anybody saw this, where there's like an iftar meal for the end of Ramadan, that something happened. There was a fire or something. So these Orthodox Jewish businessmen like gave their space and catered the whole thing and put up tents in there, whatever it was, for these this group of Muslim worshippers, because they had a building they were building in the neighborhood, and like they spent a lot of money to do it, like make Kiddush Hashem, and it has zero impact. The person doesn't like the Jews because say, oh, so now I should look the other way while you drink the blood of babies. We don't drink the blood of babies. Well, so what are you going to do? It's a total witch hunt. I mean, you're not a witch. I'm not a witch. I'm telling you I'm not a witch. Well, any witch would obviously say that. I mean, every witch we've ever met before said they're not a witch. And how are you ever going to get out of this? Right? It's just an impossible thing. And the only answer becomes, I don't need your approval to be happy. I don't need you to like me in order to know that I'm in the right place. I don't need it anymore. I'm just done with you. That's the only possible answer is I'm going to be the person I'm going to be. I'm going to be loyal to Hashem. Hashem's going to know the truth. And all the crushing and all the other things that come from the side, I mean, we ask Hashem, right? Bekarov, Nahel, Nite Kana, please gather together all your grapes and bring them to Tzia and Berina because we're really helpless without the Geder around the grapes, which Hashem has built. And he knocked it down when we were getting sour. That's what it says in Sefer Yeshaya. You know, we made sour grapes, we didn't do it right, and etc. So eventually Hashem says, listen, you know what, I got to spread you around the world. But we're still going to be the grapes. And so we drink the 4 cups of grape wine as cups of geula. Because we see here, you know, there's a long process from a grape to this fine, delicious, you know, sparkling cup of wine. And as we're doing it, we keep in mind, you know, it says in the Mishnah Berurah, better to use red wine. And he says, except if you live in places where people are doing the blood libel stuff, and then you have to drink white wine, because otherwise they'll say you're drinking blood. That's in the Mishnah Berurah. You know, it's like really the Ashken bar from the Maril, you know, it's the Ashkenazim had this real problem of these blood libels. And so even as we're living through that, we should be proud that Vihisha Amda Lavasain of Ilana, you know, this has been part of it, and we'll accept it. We'll happily, as long as we get to be the grapes, we get to be the right ones. So everyone else doesn't like us, and everyone else doesn't care about us. I think that there's never been a stronger time for this message. Certainly, in terms of world events, in my experience. That we could hopefully pass along to our children that we're very proud, and we're proud to be the ones on this side of the story. And all things, we're glad that we were on this side of it. We're not people who commit genocide, and we're not wicked people. And why Hashem allowed it to happen, we'll never understand. And what's the grand purpose in all things? One day we will see. But we have tremendous pride to be separate, and we're not embarrassed. We're not embarrassed to say that, no, we don't drink Goyish wine, and we don't mix with you. We don't want anything to do with you. And if that offends you, and then you let out that string of curse words and things that you're saying, like you just exactly prove the point. I don't know. I don't think the Talmud says those things you think it says about Goyim. But I'm tempted to say them because of how you're behaving and how you're talking and what you're doing. Like Candace Owens feels like a cow. I mean, does the Talmud say a goyim or candlelight? I don't think it says that anywhere in the Talmud. But if someone was writing a new Talmud and they were looking only at Candace and Tucker, I mean, they probably should write that. So that should be our attitude. I mean, I really think that we have to have this confidence of the Negev, you know, the suffering and the plagues, and all different things can be twisted into Gefen. It can be twisted into something noble and proud and prestigious, and that is what we're expected to be, as it says in Tehillim 80. And Yashikov, thank you everyone for coming to learn.
Somebody that wrote a beautiful book on this.
Oh wow!
What was it called?
You have it right.
Yes.
The Ani Bahashem Atzapeh is on Tehillim. End stream. I don't know. Not all of it.